Okay, prelude time, guys. This is actually going to be Hollowman, the year 2000's Hollowman. Ignore the text at the top. I goofed up. Sometimes I goof up like that. This is not Flight of the Phoenix. This is going to be Hollowman. So, enjoy. Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I take a look at Hollow Man from the year 2000. It has a 28% on the tomato meter and a 27% on the audience score. It is clearly rotten, and I'll agree with the other 366,672 audience reviews that it is rotten. It deservedly is rotten. And I think that this is an example of Hollywood attempting to make The Invisible Man into a horror slasher type of film. And that was evident from the actual theatrical trailer, in which it is portrayed as a straight up, almost a teen slasher of some type. Now, I went into this thinking it was a sci-fi action type of movie, and that's because when this was released in the theater, I was unaware of it, and it wasn't until about a year after its release on home video that I saw this movie on, actually I think I saw this on VHS, as a matter of fact, despite it being 2001. Now, as a sci-fi action, it kind of worked for me for about 10 minutes, and then all of a sudden, when it went into the horror aspect, I recognized it was trying to become some kind of horror serial killer thing, and that's when it all went downhill for me, and I just sat through the rest of it, finding out just how bad it would be. And I got the impression it was going to be really bad when I found out that Kevin Bacon was actually not only unlikable and an asshole as a scientist, but he was the villain. And it's easy to see how he's the villain because he is a scientist who does the cliched thing of injecting himself with his own experimental serum, makes himself invisible, and then the very first thing that he wants to do with his newfound invisibility is to go back to his apartment building and rape his neighbor. Yeah, that's what he wanted to do. Not any other cool thing, not rob a bank, not anything, not do a prank on somebody. No, just to do that to his neighbor. He quickly became a psychopath. So in the process of just becoming invisible, suddenly he became a total psychotic and the worst kind of villain that you could have in a movie. That's when I realized this thing was it was going to get dark real fast and it was going to get bad real fast. It's not really a fantasy. It's not the first thing that comes to my mind. If I were suddenly made invisible, what would I do? That's not the first thing that comes to mind. So let's leave that and go into what the audience actually thought of this. It is still relevant, apparently, because we have reviews from October of 2019. And that's a little odd because this is one of the films that has recently been removed from Netflix and other streaming services due to the basically the Disney buy-up of everything in anticipation of taking over the market with Disney Plus. This is one of the films that has just recently disappeared from everywhere else. I don't know if it's actually available on Disney Plus. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's going to go into that mysterious Disney vault. But in any case, you may have a hard time finding this out there, at least in a legitimate fashion, to find out how bad it is. So let's anyway get into it. We have a 3-star review. H.G. Wells' novel continuously compels when being modernized with astonishing effects and smoother psychological study before succumbing into becoming its own version of Alien as eventful satisfaction for Verhoeven's recognizable taste in violently disposable storytelling. I have no idea what they're trying to say here. I'll just say that this was directed by a German director. His name's Verhoeven. Maybe this person's German, and that's why their English comes across as so strange to me when I read it. In any case, this is from the H.G. Wells novel, The Invisible Man, very loosely taken from that. Psychological, I don't know if it's psychological, other than that it's just like an attempt to make some kind of horror film. Alien, I don't get that. It is kind of claustrophobic. Most of it is set in this underground lab, so I guess that's what they're saying. This reminds them of Alien. I didn't get that from it. I just got that it had a budget that didn't want to take us outside the lab. In any case, I disagree. I think this movie should have like 1.5 to 2 stars. It might peak at 2 stars. If you can forgive how quickly the main villain becomes psychotic and villainous, yeah, you could say it's worth maybe 2 stars. It's just a weird kind of movie. Um, it has some cool effects with the visual portrayal of how the invisibility works as this serum absorbs into your body. Different layers of your body become invisible, and it's kind of gross in a way because you become visible from the outside in, so you could see the internal organs for a while and stuff and tissue in the body until your entire body becomes invisible. It's kind of disgusting in that way, but it is, the CGI for the time was good on that effect. Again, this was filmed in Germany too, I believe, and is considered actually a German movie. That's what the technical term for this would be. It's a German film, even though it's all English actors. You have Kevin Bacon, Josh Brolin, Elizabeth Shue. Kevin Bacon works as a villain, but the way they do it in this film, he just suddenly becomes from an unlikable, egotistical scientist to, oh, all of a sudden I'm a psychopath and I'm, going to do these things to my neighbor and I need to kill everybody else, and it's not explained exactly why. He just needs to kill everybody else off, but he does. Josh Brolin, he wasn't a big star at the time, so when I saw this movie for the first time, I didn't, think anything of him. He was very disposable in his role. Elizabeth Shue, of course, I recognize her from other things, from Back to the Future, and of course now you would find her very much older Elizabeth Shue in The Boys on Amazon Prime. She works very well in that. In this one, she could have been replaced with anybody else. It wasn't anything special in her performance. So I'll say, it peaks out at 1.5 stars on this, maybe two if you give it a little leeway in, the how quickly the villain appears. Um, Let's move on. We're still in October of 2019. 2.5 stars. It's not terrible. It has a nice concept that just falls short on execution. I'll largely agree, but I don't think it goes up to 2.5 stars. 4 stars. Great effects. I enjoyed the story more than critics seem to. Narcissistic Sebastian and crew do well as scientists turned survivors. Yeah, one scientist becomes the stalking killer, and the other ones are trying to survive him. Doesn't really add up though. I mean, of all the things you could do with invisibility, why do you turn it into that? This could have been so much more, but again, it just turns into a horror slasher type film. It's very disappointing. 1.5 stars, a great idea, but the realization was a little less because the film revolves around the gain and the trivial fact that he does not want to be visible again, and that therefore he does everything to prevent the advance of the searches. This film is not interesting, or the first part and the last part, and this generates a huge flatness. Well, okay, they're providing the plot reason that I overlooked. I guess supposedly Kevin Bacon's villain character, he wants to kill the others off because they want to return him to visibility with some kind of antidote, or counter serum to inject into him. And, he can't have that. He needs to stay invisible to become this massive master serial killer rapist. So he's got to stay invisible. So he needs to kill them off to prevent them from turning him back visible. That doesn't really work, does it? It sounds a little ridiculous. If we just go into the surface logic of this, let's say you're made invisible as Kevin Bacon's scientist is. You know what? One of the first things that's going to happen is you're going to realize that when you close your eyes to go to sleep, you can't really close your eyes anymore because your eyelids are invisible. So just little stuff like that right away kind of makes you wonder why you would want to stay permanently in that condition. If anything, after a few hours of that, I'd want the antidote to go back, and I'd want to know that I was going back visible again. And then if I wanted to be a supervillain and rob banks or some such, or whatever weird thing I wanted to do, I could make myself visible and invisible as I wanted to, and I could truly be some kind of supervillain. But in this movie, Kevin Bacon's supervillain character just wants to stay invisible the whole time. Doesn't make a lot of sense because, again, you have to remove all your clothes. So what are you going to do when it's a little too cold outside? You're just going to walk around nude outside when it's snowing. It just falls apart on, cursory logic. So again, that's why this thing doesn't work for me. One of the reasons, other than the fact that Kevin Bacon's villain just becomes a villain so quickly. And they try to say that it's something to do with the serum that was injected into him, but yet they injected this serum into an ape before they injected it into him, and the ape didn't become psychotic. And the ape was able to return to being a regular ape again. So it doesn't work. They didn't set it up right. No explanation on how quickly he just becomes this crazed villain. Let's continue. 1.5 stars. No, I read that one. 1 star. Amazing special effects, but it's mostly a bunch of bad and over-the-top acting with little plot. Yeah, 1.5 stars. A sci-fi film with very little rhyme or reason behind it. The film offers an interesting concept but fails to take it anywhere interesting or thought-provoking, and it doesn't offer any great characters to follow. By the end, it just becomes your basic stereotypical horror flick with nothing tangible to back it up. The special effects were nice and Jerry Goldsmith's score was fantastic, but other than those aspects, I don't recommend it. I didn't even realize that it had a Jerry Goldsmith score because it wasn't memorable to me in any way, so I'm somehow doubting it was his best work. I'm just going to drop that there. 4 stars, an underrated film filled with amazing effects. Okay for its time. In the year 2000, the effect of the invisibility was impressive, but it wasn't blow me away. I have to watch this 100 times impressive, and it was only one small element of the film. 4 stars, you're on some heavy stuff of some kind there. 2.5 stars, cast and effects are good, but everything could be better. Yeah, the whole story, the script itself could have been better. It was just a waste of potential, in my opinion. 3 stars, Hollowman is directed by Paul Verhoeven, the carefree Dutchman who has made some gems like Starship Troopers, Basic Instinct, and Total Recall. His films are heavy on gore and sex, and this film has amples of both. Hollow Man is a take on The Invisible Man and contains a maverick performance by Kevin Bacon, ably supported by the likes of Elizabeth Shue and Josh Brolin. This is a movie which, depending on your taste and moral compass, will appeal accordingly, and I think this is a brave attempt by everyone to do something. This is a whole paragraph not telling me a whole lot other than they think that this is great. They're comparing this to Total Recall and Starship Troopers. I disagree. Yes, this director did those. They're much better films. Total Recall, the original, of course, is a great film. It was perfect in a lot of ways, although it looks campy and dated. That's what the effect was supposed to be. This thing, no, it's like the worst of this director's films. I mean, there might be something worse, but this is the worst that I know of from him. There's nothing outstanding about the actors. None of them performed in any way in which they could not have been replaced by any other actor, and it wouldn't have affected anything. So I completely disagree, and there's nothing brave about this other than, like he's saying, this director likes to put a lot of sexual stuff in. Well, yeah, he put the rape thing in there right away. That was the first thing Kevin Bacon's villain did, and that almost makes me want to believe that perhaps the director, that's his fantasy, that's the first thing he would use the invisibility power for. That's what I'm suspecting. So 1.5 stars. This movie is much like Kevin Bacon's wiener, very limp. I don't know if that was a thing in the movie. Maybe it was, and I've forgotten about it. 2.5 stars. A pretty cheesy and entertaining horror flick. Surprisingly good special effects are the only new thing offered here, but the film is mostly fun if lacking any real scares. No, it's not fun. There aren't any real scares. And like I said, the theatrical trailer promised scares. They promised a horror movie, straight up horror movie, but it wasn't really. It was kind of like a slasher movie in a way, but it wasn't scary like one of those would have been. It was kind of marketing. I took it as a sci-fi action adventure type, and I was disappointed because that's how it starts. It doesn't have a horror vibe when it starts. It tries to later, but no, it fails. It's not scary at all. 5 stars. One of my favorite movies for some reason. Remember watching it in high school and still remember it 15 years later. I'm hesitant to believe that, and I also would like to know which part you remember so well. I'm guessing I know which part, and it's not a good part. 3 stars. Paul Verhoeven more or less succeeds at revamping the Invisible Man concept into a sexual thriller. I wouldn't call it that just because of that first scene of the bad guy. But anyway, while it suffers from thin background characters and subpar acting, Hollowman is still entertaining enough that its flaws are forgivable. I'll just have to stop there when this reviewer said sexual thriller. That's not what was promised to the audience, and that's not what I took away from it, but okay. Again, is somebody having fantasies about a certain part of this? That's what I'm guessing. 5 stars. I have always loved this epic thriller and its visual effects. I don't get why such a low rating, and I would have given the Academy Award for visual effects to this movie. The only thing I find stupid is that Sebastian just couldn't die in the last part. Fire, electricity, metal hit on the head, and he didn't die. Okay, I'm going to ignore the other ridiculous part about this being 5 stars, and I am going to agree it was ridiculous at the end. He's just invisible. He's just a guy that's invisible. But yet at the end, yeah, he's hit with fire, electricity. He's hit in the head by a metal rod. All these things. He falls. All these things would have taken out a regular man, and yet somehow, just because he's invisible, he just doesn't die. Yeah, that was a big fail at the end, and I should have mentioned that up front. But by the end arriving, I had already checked out largely. But yeah, the end is just a fail. 3 stars. This is an updated version of The Invisible Man. While the movie isn't titled the same, nor does it exactly follow the original 1933 movie, exactly follow it. There's nothing about this that follows it, but let's continue. And the H.G. Wells novel that it is based on, the theme is pretty much the same. An ambitious scientist invents a way to make things invisible and tries it on himself. He finds out that the process is not reversible, thus he goes insane and becomes mentally unstable and violent. He goes on a murderous spree but is killed in the end. Not one of the best films. Well, see, they're saying something different than what the story actually tells you. They're saying that he found out that the process isn't reversible and that made him insane. I'm sorry, but that's not what happened. He was invisible, and before anybody told him that this wasn't reversible, he was already going after his neighbor. No, I'm sorry. It doesn't work like that. 1 star. The Invisible Rapist. There, I've told you everything you need to know about this crappy movie. Now you don't have to waste your time watching it. Yeah, that's quite an effective synopsis there. 3.5 stars. Don't know why a lot of people dislike this one. I thought it was pretty good. 2.5 stars. It's a good movie to watch. 3 stars. I wish Verhoeven could have dipped deeper into his Freudian world. His talent is way more than making a B-horror movie. I'll say he dipped into his own fantasy world on this one. If you want to call that Freudian, it could be. 2.5 stars. Was a little disappointed seeing it on the big screen. Has its moments. Well, I'm sorry you saw this on the big screen. You probably should have been a little more disappointed than anything else. You don't sound that disappointed. You're giving it 2.5 stars. I would have been a lot disappointed if I had watched this in the theater. This is something that I should have, seen straight to video. And we are in 2016 reviews now, for what it's worth. 1.5 star. Verhoeven is known for his sadistic characters and extreme violence. Since these are in this film, there is little to recommend here. 1.5 stars. Arrogant scientist turns himself invisible and attacks his support team in this sci-fi flick that is more hollow than its lead characters. Yeah, that's a good play on this. You could have called it Hollow Story. 1.5 stars. This is definitely a weird movie, not just its plot, but what it tends to focus on. The effects are okay, the acting is fine, just overall it becomes too generic and it really drags on to the point where you just don't care anymore. Overall, I wouldn't recommend it. Doesn't have unintentional funny moments in it, so it's just a little better than a bad movie. Yeah, it doesn't work as a so bad it's good movie. There's nothing to make you laugh out loud. There's nothing, that it doesn't self-parody. It's not cringeworthy in the way that you would burst out laughing at how bad it is, so it doesn't work like that either. 1 star. Terrible movie with good actors. Acting and production values, basically all bad writing. Yeah, whoever wrote the script is just a big nothing. 3.5 stars. I haven't seen this film in quite some time, but I remember enjoying the premise. One of the main reasons I liked this film is the performance from Kevin Bacon as a menacing man who is suffering mental anguish from an experiment gone wrong. Basically, he is invisible and cannot bring himself back. It's a good transformation from good to bad, and Bacon does a good job playing a man who day by day loses his mind and respect for others. A good thriller. Again, I don't agree. He quickly turns evil. long before he realizes that it's irreversible. And in fact, it's not irreversible. No one told him it was. And in fact, the other scientists are trying to reverse it for him, but he just doesn't want to let them. So, no, this doesn't make sense logically. 3.5 stars. Loved it when I was younger and still feel it is a good movie. I enjoy Bacon. He's a man of many faces. Yeah, he's in so many bad movies. R.I.P.D., for example. There are so many others. I believe he was in the original, what is it, the one where they put themselves into a state of death and then come back. I don't even remember the name now. He's been in so many bad movies. He was in Footloose. That's largely a musical. Yes, people like it, but it's a musical. I really haven't enjoyed him in anything else. He's very forgettable, and he's in very weird movies where it's like he doesn't know how to pick them. He always picks the ones that put him in a weird situation where I don't know, he's not really a believable good guy. He's not really a believable bad guy. He's just almost like a secondary character, even when he's at his best. I don't get it. Anyways, not my thing, I guess. 3.5 stars. You've got to hand it to Paul Verhoeven. He's always had a knack to sex up all of his movies, and he normally finds a way to inject some female nudity wherever possible. Think the infamous three-titted hooker from Total Recall, the infamous beaver shot from Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct, and what he did to Jesse Spano in Showgirls. I think he even throws in a shower scene at his Starship Troopers just because. In this movie, once Kevin Bacon turns invisible, he does just what a normal guy would do. Yeah, it's like a fantasy on the part of the director. This is what he would do. He would hang out in the girls' restrooms and just lay down under the stall to look up at them. This is what he would do if he was invisible. And in fact, I guess he would do what Kevin Bacon did. He would just move on in on them, right? It's his fantasy film. 3 stars, a slickly made sci-fi thriller with amazing visual effects, a bombastic music score by the late Jerry Goldsmith, and a likable cast. It is very unfortunate that such effort was made for a script that never uses its intriguing premise to its full potential, just one man's perverted tendencies, which isn't the slightest bit interesting to me as a viewer, and then the film devolves into slasher movie mode, which does give it a schlock value, but overall I can't deny that the opportunity is completely squandered. Why are you giving this 3 stars? You've basically just agreed with everything I said, and yet you're saying it's a 3-star film. I say that you're abusing the star system here. Bump it down to 1.5 stars, please. 2 stars. This was meh. Stick to the Claude Rains classic. It's more worth your time than this downer. Elizabeth Shue went from smart to obnoxious in this role with, "You want to be God? I'll show you God. Oh, please, honey, you couldn't have tried to be any more corny with that line delivery." Sign, The Invisible Man from 1932 is timeless compared to Hollowman. Yeah, Elizabeth Shue, she's not real good in a lot of things. She's largely forgotten. Even when she showed up in this movie and I saw it in 2000, I was like, wow, I haven't seen her in a long time. Because after Back to the Future, she just kind of vanished off the face of the earth. And I don't know why. She's not off-putting or anything, but in this movie, she doesn't do the movie any favor. 1.5 stars. The power of invisibility should not be taken lightly, neither for the power it gives over others, but the effect that it has on the invisible themselves. So this reviewer is trying to say that's the theme here. I disagree. I agree with the 1.5 stars. If there's a theme to take for this, from this, it's that somebody, if they got invisibility, would just become a sex pervert and a rapist. And yeah, a lot of people out there probably would. That's unfortunately the truth of the matter. And this director probably would have if he had been given the chance, and this was like his fantasy, and it shows. So anyway, I'm going to call it because it's just wearing me out thinking about it. 28% tomato meter, 27% audience score. I think it's exactly right where it needs to be. There's no reason to track this down. Like I said, this has disappeared from streaming already due to the new streaming wars, and who knows how bad this is going to get. But a lot of titles they're disappearing where you could have found this on Netflix or wherever easily. Nope, this is now vanished. But again, it's not worth finding. So I hope Disney or whoever that thinks they're going to lock this up and put it out later, they're going to get something out of this. I beg to differ that this is something they need to steal away. So maybe it will disappear inside the vault. In any case, I'll say goodbye to this forgettable year 2000 film, and I will see you on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.